Check out FlipsideGaming.com for all your gaming needs. Use the promo code HEROES to save 10% on all orders over $10 and support the channel at the same time. Hey there, it's John from Heroes and Legends. Welcome to part 1 of our 6-part Rivals of Ixalan full set review. Today we're going to look at all of the white cards that will be included in this new set coming up. And if you've seen our reviews before, this is first and foremost a limited review. We're going to talk about the utility of these cards in draft and sealed first. But of course, if there's cards that could cross over into other formats like Standard, Modern, Commander, or whatever, we will address that a little bit as well. Now, before we get started, just a really fast reminder, if you check out the description below and you're looking for a way to help support what we do here at the channel, you'll find some there, which include our Patreon link is down there, as well as links to products on Amazon, where if you make any purchases via those links, no matter what it is at that point, we'll get a small percentage. And of course, Flipside Gaming, if you use the promo code that they offer, also a small percentage will come back to us. Always appreciated. With that being said, let's get into it. We got a lot to talk about. Baffling Ends. I love that name. Baffling End. Good name for a card. But is it a good card? Yes, actually it is. This is a fantastic limited card. In draft, I could even see myself first picking this some of the time because it is a removal spell. Now, it's a little conditional. Only works on creatures converted to mana cost 3 or less, so you can't deal with every problem, but you're only paying 2 for it. It will exile that creature as long as an opponent controls it. And if they can get rid of this, they actually don't get the creature back. What they get instead is a 3/3 green Dinosaur creature token with trample, which hopefully by then you have an answer to, whether it's a good blocker, bounce spell, removal spell, whatever, right? So it's a great tempo play and also maybe takes away a cog in their machine if they're playing tribal or something like that. And it deals with early threats, especially like aggro threats or something like that. For some reason, if I wasn't main decking this, you can definitely bring it in if you see some small creatures coming at you in game 1 and a lot of aggression. So that's actually kind of cool. But most of the time, I see myself main decking this, quite honestly. So, fantastic card there. What about Standard? Could it make it there? I think it could, actually. Even though, again, it doesn't deal with all threats. But one of the shortcomings, I think, of the Approach deck was the fact that it couldn't deal with early creatures, some early aggro creatures. Maybe I'd want to test this in that deck and see if it shores up that weakness a little bit. I think it might. So that's something to think about when it comes to the world of Standard. Maybe this shows up in some other places, too. Who knows? But I do think it's actually powerful enough to see play there. Bishop of Binding. Okay, this is our first vampire of the day, because you do have to remember, white is still the color of vampires and dinosaurs. So here we are with a vampire. This one's interesting. Much like the previous card, it does remove an opponent's creature, but this is much more fragile. It's a 1/1. It's not going to be hard for them to get rid of this. When they do, they get their creature back, and I don't like that, especially for 4 mana. I mean, you got cards out there like Cast Out and stuff that just feel much better. Now, what's the advantage of playing this over, say, Cast Out, which, of course, isn't in the set, but the big advantage, of course, is you're getting a vampire. Now, it's a small vampire, but it does have an ability attached to it where it can attack in, and when it does, it gives target vampire +X based on the power of what you exile. So, if you don't have any other vampires, it can target itself. Downside is you really want to be attacking in with this, exposing it, even if it is getting a buff, because it could be taken out maybe by a removal spell that's contingent on attacking or blocking or a combat trick or something like that, and then it swings back to your opponent's favor, getting their creature back, and that can be awkward for you. Do I play this at all in Limited? Yeah, I see myself playing it if I'm really all in on vampires. If I feel like I'm going to have maybe a lifelink or a flying vampire that I could give the +X to, and maybe I just get through with one big turn thanks to this card, it might be worth my trouble, quite honestly. But if I'm not all in on that plan, I'm probably skipping this one most of the time. And as far as Standard goes, I do think we will see a vampire deck. I mean, we saw the mono-white vampire deck. It actually looked kind of sweet at the Pro Tour. And every deck that was in day 1 made it to day 2. Not that there were many of them. It was basically one team playing it. None of them made it to the top 8, unfortunately. Because I think if it did, maybe there would have been more of a spotlight on the deck. But you still see a lot of them show up at like Friday Night Magic and stuff. It's a really fun deck. I think in the new meta, that deck is going to take some black in. I don't know how much, but is definitely going to become more of an Orzhov deck. But with that being said, I don't think this card is even good enough to make it there. I really don't see this, unfortunately, at this point, making it into the Standard game and the current meta. It's just too much of a fast, aggressive meta. Blazing Hope. Alright, this is a weird one. I mean, I like that it only costs 1 white, that it's an instant, that it exiles the creature. But wow, that drawback is super narrow. I mean, the creature's power has to be equal or greater than my life total. That really boxes you in to the point where there's many times this card is just simply useless. And when you can use this card, it probably means your life total is so low, you got other problems other than just one creature that you're going to have to deal with most of the time, right? So do you actually play this in Limited? I'm going to have to say no. Like, I really don't see myself running this in a deck. I can't even think of a scenario where I'm sideboarding it in, because like I said, by the time it's turned on, like it might just be too late for you unless you get really, really lucky and can stabilize. It just feels so strange. I mean, it's super economical, especially by today's standards when it comes to removal spells, but I can't bring myself to feel like this is something that's going to work for me. Even in standard, I can't think of situations where this makes sense. Now, the only thing that I can think of, and the reason is probably here, and I'm going to talk more about this a little bit later in the video, but Wizards is trying to put more answers in sets. Maybe this is one of those answers. Maybe they feel like, you know what? We put a light reanimation theme in this set, which maybe they'll expound upon when we go to Dominaria or something like that in the future. So they might want an answer kind of built in a little bit early. That way, if there's some sort of huge creature that can be cheated into play later on somehow, then there's already an answer for it. That's probably why this exists. But at this point, like, you're just kind of looking at this card and kind of scratching your head, I think. Even in other formats, like you can think about like Death Shadow decks or something, but do they even want to play white necessarily? Not all the time. And even if you were to do that, wouldn't you just play Path to Exile? I think I would. So I don't know. Maybe there's plans for this in the future, and I guess we'll just kind of wait and see on this one. Cleansing Ray. This one's kind of cool because it has a dual answer to it. It's sorcery speed, 2 casting costs, but you can destroy a vampire or an enchantment. For me, this is a limited card that is going to be in the sideboard until I need it. So I play game 1. If there's some problematic vampires and or enchantments, I'm going to side it in. But I probably won't start with it. But once I have it, I'll be happy to have it, right? If you need a card like this, you'll be glad it exists. Now, what about the World of Standard? I think it could be a sideboard card only if the vampire deck gets there. If the vampire deck is like awesome, then this will start showing up in sideboards. If it's not all that great or not something people are concerned about, it won't make it there. Divine Verdict. This is your classic limited removal, basically. Like, this is a reprint. We've seen this in many sets. I played with this many, many times, and it's good for you. Like, it's nothing special. Forecasting cost. It's a little situational. The creature has to be attacking or blocking. But it's white removal. You're going to be happy to run these when you get them, and it's at common, so keep an eye out for them in drafts. Everdawn Champion. This is another limited card for me. You're not going to see this, I don't think, crossover into standard, but first off, I want to point out it's a human soldier. So it seems like some of the more pushed, like, small creatures in white are not like dinosaurs or vampires. They're human soldiers. They probably did that on purpose just to keep things a little tamer when it comes to aggro and white. But this one in particular costs 3 for a 2/2. That doesn't feel great. But it can't be dealt damage in combat, which is cool. Your opponent's going to have to hit it with direct damage or a destroy spell or something like that. And then they're going to have to use one of those things on a 2/2. And at some point they might have to, right? Who knows? Or if they have a big enough blocker, like it's kind of a wash if they have a 2/4 or something. But early on, you play the center in 3, maybe you sneak across a little bit of damage. It's kind of hard to deal with. It's a little annoying. It's not the best card in the world, but I don't think it's a bad one. So it might not always make your build depending on your curve if you need something in the 3 spot or if you don't. But I could see myself playing this in limited games. Not a high draft pick for me or anything, but you might be able to pick one of these up in the middle of the pack and be happy with it. Exalted Sky Marcher. This one is a card that we've seen variants of many times over the years. 2/3 flyer for 3, very simple, but this one happens to be a vampire, which of course will play into some of the vampire synergies, which makes it a little bit better in this set. This is another card we're not going to see in standard or anything like that, but you'll be really happy to pick this up. For me, this is a higher to mid-level draft pick. I would say, you know what, if there's not something amazingly broken in my pack, and say maybe pick 3, pick 4, I'm going to go for this, and I'm going to be pretty happy with it. It's just a nice workhorse card, and if I have synergies with it, wonderful. Famished Paladin. Okay, this has got my attention immediately because it's a 3/3 for 2, and it's a vampire on top of that. The drawback being it doesn't untap as normal. You have to gain life to untap. But with that being said, is it good or is it bad? I actually think it's still a very good card. Maybe not for a second pick in a pack, but I'm going to pick this up relatively high, I think, because even if I'm using this as a 3/3 defender, I'm actually pretty happy with it in a lot of builds. If I'm trying to muck up the ground or protect myself against some aggro, this will be good. If I didn't main deck it and I'm up against an aggro deck, I will certainly be sideboarding it in, right? So if I have some vampire synergies, a lot of them, of course, revolving around life gain and lifelink, then this card gets a little bit better. Even if I can untap it only a percentage of the time, the fact that I got some use out of it early in the game, potentially, I don't know, it's worth it to me, I think. So, yeah, I'd be happy to play this one, regardless whether I'm in vampires or not, but probably more so if I'm in vampires. Could this card see play in standard is the big question. I don't really see it there because of the condition. I think the condition is a little too much for this. I think there's better things you could be doing even at your 2-drop in standard right now. But what I'm interested in is maybe Commander, for example. There is a card from Shadowmoor called Resplendent Mentor, which is a 5 casting cost 2/2, but it gives all white creatures the ability to tap and gain 1 life. So it's a 2-card combo with this that actually gives you as much life as you would like to take, basically, as long as your opponent can't disrupt the combo. So that's actually kind of weird. Definitely for you Commander players out there if you want to try something out. Or maybe you're just a really ambitious Modern brewer and you think you can get it there, go for it, I would say. Also, too, there's some random interactions. Like, just giving this lifelink is actually pretty decent. So, I don't know, it's an interesting card, one to keep an eye on. Forerunner of the Legion. Okay, this is part of a cycle. There's one for each tribe. This is the vampire one, of course. And they all act as tutors for creature spells of their given tribe. In this case, it's a vampire, and it doesn't go right in my hand, but it goes on top of my library, which is, okay, good enough, I guess, for 3 mana. When it comes to tutors, I love tutors. But tutors can start to feel a little expensive when you're looking at 4 or 5 mana. This one, 3 mana, and I get a 2/2 creature with an ability on top of it. So, you know what? I'm alright with that. For limited purposes, you're going to skip this if you don't have any other vampires, right? Bottom line. But if you have some good vampires and you want to speed things along and get to your big cards, this is a good way to do it, actually. It can be a very good card for you. So not for all builds, but if you're in the vampire builds, or even just have a good vampire target, this is runnable. Aside from that, could this see standard play? I think it actually could. If the vampire deck is looking for a way to tutor up a certain vampire at a certain time, yeah, this could be part of the deck. It just depends on where the build goes. Commander vampire decks are also very popular right now too, so that goes for a lot of these vampires. A lot of them fit well into that particular archetype. Imperial Ceratops. Okay, this is just kind of a curve filler, like it's nothing too exciting. I do like the design here because it crosses over vampires and dinosaurs a little bit. It's a dinosaur with enrage, but that enrage lets you gain life, which sometimes is good for vampire strategies, right? So it kind of crosses over in the same color. Brilliant design, I love it. That being said, do you play it all the time? Probably not. Like, it's a 3/5 for 5. It's okay, especially if you want something a little more defensive. The life gain might only matter with certain combinations of some of your vampire cards. If you have some of those combinations, maybe it's playable, or you're just desperate for a dinosaur because you're in sealed and you're trying to cobble together some dinosaurs, then yeah, it's very playable. But will this beat out all the other 5 drops that you have in your pool? A lot of the times, probably not. I would say you end up playing this maybe, 30-40% of the time, something like that. Other times you're going to have better stuff. And of course, I think it goes without saying, I don't see this really crossing over into standard or anything like that. Legion Conquistador. Okay. Legion Conquistador is back. Sure, why not? One of the things I'll say is there's a few cards in the set that are actually cards just ripped right out of the first Ixalan, okay? And I felt like that was a little lazy, and I'll talk more about that later. But this one I understand because this is contingent upon having multiple copies. This card is bad with 1 copy. It's okay with 2. It's good with 3. It's awesome with 4. So you want to have copies of this. So if you took out some of the Ixalan packs to put, of course, Rivals of Ixalan packs into Drafts and Seal, then you don't want to dilute this card because it becomes just basically unplayable at some point. So it makes sense that it shows up again, and I'm okay with that. I'll give them a pass on this one. It's actually a good strategy. Like I said, it's good in multiples, though. Don't play one of these. But if you can play multiples, 3, 4, if you're real lucky, 5, this can be a good strategy. I won't lie, I've lost to this in draft. It's a little harder to pull off in sealed, though, honestly, because I found that usually I only end up with, at best 2 of these, usually 1. But if you happen to get 3, it can be decent for you, and that can happen once in a while. Draft, though, is where this card's at. You can just start picking these up. Like, if you grab one early, and you can go through 3 packs picking these things up, you could have a really good strategy on your hands. And they're vampires too, of course. So something to think about there. Not a great commander card, obviously. And I really don't see this impacting standard. I know some people try to play around with it a little bit in the past, but I do think there's just better things right now that are a little more consistent for you when you're talking about 3 mana. Luminous Bonds. Well, here's kind of your pacifism effect. It's a common. You're going to love this if you can get it. It's great white removal. It doesn't deal with activated abilities this time around, and yeah, we've seen better versions of these in the past, but this is what we got for this set, so if this is what you open, this is what you open, and you're not going to be really sad about it. Again, it won't cross over into standard, but it's a good card for limited purposes. Majestic Heliopterus. Oh, wizards and your made-up dinosaur names. I don't know if I said that right or not. Maybe they'll tell us one day, but this is a 4 casting cost 2/2 with flying. Well, that doesn't feel super good, but if it attacks alongside another dinosaur, it can give it flying. So that's actually kind of cool because sometimes your dinosaurs are just big and dumb and can't get by. So something like this does increase the odds of you getting more damage across faster. Do you play this a lot in Limited? You play this if you have dinosaurs. If you don't have dinosaurs, maybe you play it if you're really desperate for a flyer. And that does happen sometimes, especially in Sealed. But I think most of the time you're going to skip it unless you have some good targets on the ground that you want to get into the air. Martyr of Dusk. This reminds me a little bit of Doom Traveler, which is a card I actually liked. It's probably not as good as Doom Traveler, but it is a vampire, and it gives you a vampire token when it dies, so that's kind of cool. It's also a little aggressive, being a 2/1 for 2. I mean, not super aggro, because, again, you want more of a probably 2/2 for 2 typically, but it is worth noting that you do get the 1/1 when this goes away, so it does replace itself in a way with a smaller creature. Yeah, not bad for 2 mana. Like, it's not amazing. Maybe I'm not always running this. But again, if I'm all in on vampires and I'm looking for some 2-drops, and 2-drops are critically important for your draft and your sealed decks. You want to make sure you always have enough of them. So if I'm in the market for one, this is a fine one. Maybe it doesn't always make my cut, though. Moment of Triumph. Great combat trick for 1 mana. I love 1 mana combat tricks. And so many times, I'll tell you, maybe you look at your pool, especially when you're playing sealed, and you say, wow, I don't have enough removal. In a pinch, a combat trick can be at least the next best thing. Many times it will act as removal, and sometimes they're cheaper than some of the big removal spells, like this one, for example, and they'll come out with the same effect. You do have to work a little harder for it, but it can happen. Also, too, this one gains you a couple life, which, again, could play into some other synergies with the vampires as well. And it's good no matter what you're doing, though. Vampires, dinosaurs, whatever. Great combat trick. I actually like this quite a bit. And I'd be happy to run 1, maybe even 2 sometimes in my deck if I'm short on removal. Paladin of Atonement. Okay, this is an interesting 2-drop. It's a 1/1, so it comes in very fragile. Now, you have opportunities to increase this by taking damage, but unfortunately it goes by the turn. So if I took damage this turn, no matter how much damage it is, on the next upkeep, I get +1/+1. Now, this does count for each upkeep, so it's not just your upkeep, which means if you get hurt on opponent's turns, the next upkeep, you will also get +1/+1 on this. And when it dies, you get life based on the counters that were on it. I don't know. I'm not thrilled about this one. I mean, sure, you can manipulate this with, like, Pain Lands or something. For example, you cast your stuff with Pain Lands, this thing gets a little bit bigger. Don't use a Pain Land until your opponent ends their turn. Tap it, damage yourself. This gets a little bigger. There's like things you can do, especially in conjunction with lifelink, where maybe you're not worried about pinging yourself all that much. But that's a lot of work, considering it doesn't have evasion, and you might just have to work hard for a big creature that dies and gives you a couple life at the end. I don't know. It just doesn't feel like a good use of my time or resources, quite honestly. It is a vampire if you need a vampire, but I can't really say much else about it other than that, sadly. Pride of Conquerors. Okay, this is a combat trick that gets better with Ascend. So if you can get the City's Blessing, this thing is better than if you don't have it. And if you're going wide, which a lot of times vampires are, they're being aggressive, sometimes creating tokens, going a little bit wider, this is a good card. If you're going tall with dinosaurs, it's probably not as good. But again, it is a combat trick at the end of the day. So again, if you don't have a lot of removal or better combat tricks, this is still perhaps playable. Might not always make your cut, but it's much better if you think you're going to be going wide, right? So if you go wide and give everything +1/+1, that's not bad. If it happens to be +2/+2, well, wonderful. It's even better. And if you are in a token strategy, there's a good chance you will hit the Ascend. So yeah, I actually like this for the vampire deck, maybe more so than, say, the dinosaur bill. But yeah, there's times you're going to play this, you'll be happy, and there's other times you'll probably skip this one. Just depends on your deck. Radiant Destiny. This is first off, I love another good name, Radiant Destiny. They've been saving these names up because these are good ones. Okay. So first off, another Ascend card. And the Ascend this time is going to give your stuff Vigilance, but the card itself gives the chosen tribe that you control +1/+1. So it's the Anthem effect for the tribe. Only costs 3. Okay, we've seen better Anthem effects in the past. Sure, of course. But this is 2018. Magic's a little slower than it used to be, and it's just the way it is. So am I sad about this card? No, actually, I'd be happy to play this. Again, this is a card that's probably better with the vampires and the dinosaurs because, again, Anthem effects are better if you're going wide than going tall. But they're not bad with dinosaurs or really any tribe that you can shoe it in, even if you splash for this. And it's only 1 white, so you could splash it into other builds, too, like pirates or merfolk. So I actually kind of like this card a lot. I feel like this could be a pretty high pick for me. And as long as you have at least one creature in play, you are getting some sort of benefit from it the turn it comes into play. Now, when you do hit Ascend, if you hit Ascend it gets even better with the Vigilance. So I actually like this card quite a bit, and I'd be happy to play it as long as I'm pretty dedicated to a tribe. If I'm not, if I'm scattered all over the place, maybe my seal pool, I'm just playing whatever I have, then it's probably not worth running. But as long as I'm at least semi-dedicated to a tribe, yeah, I'd throw it in there as long as I had room. Standard, could it get there? I think it could. I'd like to see someone test this in like the vampire build, because I do think that's where probably this would have the most impact. Again, because you're going wide, you're trying to be a little more aggressive, stuff like that. So yeah, I don't know. Maybe it doesn't quite get there, but I at least want to test it out. Raptor Companion. Okay, here's where I get on their case for being lazy. Okay, so this card just pulled right out of Ixalan. Wizards, really? Could we not make another white and 1/3/1 dinosaur and just call it something else and get another piece of art on it? Really? I'll draw you something. If that's the problem, if we're running low on art, I'll draw you something. So anyway, it's fine for limited. Like, there's nothing really to say about this. You played with the card, you know it's good. Or not good, right? The card's fine. It's fine. Like, there's not a lot to say about it. It's better if you have dinosaur synergies, obviously. Sometimes, if you need a 2-drop, it's a fine aggressive 2-drop. A 3/1, it will usually at least trade up for something. Like, sometimes you're just trading for a 3 or 4-drop even. You know what? I'm happy with that a lot of the time. And if your opponent stumbles, like they put down a creature, you have a quick removal spell, they stumble on land or something, you can actually get maybe like 6 damage across with this thing, and that doesn't feel bad for 2 mana. So, you know, I don't want to go overboard with these things, but running 1, maybe sometimes 2 if I'm really like strapped for creatures and strapped for 2-drops. It's done me well in the past. It's not amazing, but it's not bad. Sanguine Glorifier. And this is just another good curve filler for limited purposes at common. Like, even if I don't get the +1/+1 counter, because it does have to be another target vampire, it's still a 3/3 for 4, which is just kind of good enough. Like, nice little mediocre 4-drop, which sometimes you play, sometimes you don't. If you have enough vampires, and this is actually adding 4/4 power toughness on the board, yeah, that's not bad. You know what? 4/4 power toughness for 4 and limited? Yeah, I'm fine with that. Sign me up. It's a vampire on its own. Doesn't always make my cut, obviously, but a good portion of the time, it could. Sky Marcher Aspirant. This is another Ascend card. This time the Ascend, the City's Blessing, only gives it flying. I feel like by the time you get the City's Blessing, giving this flying isn't going to be all that important. I mean, it might be cool, but I don't know. I think I'm playing this more because I want to go aggro with a 2/1/1 drop, basically. And it's a vampire, too, so you got that going for it. So it doesn't make my build all the time, probably, but if I'm in an aggressive build or a vampire build, I'm looking at this. So vampires, that's pretty obvious. But also, too, remember, you don't necessarily have to stick solely into one tribe. There's a lot of aggressive pirates, so you can maybe mix some vampires and pirates and do something aggressive that way, like in Boros colors or something like that. You could have a pretty good draft on your hands going in that direction, too. Now, you lose out on some of the tribal synergies, which can be powerful, but, you know, we've all been there. We've seen drafts that have started off well and then didn't go so well, and you have to kind of change course. Well, that wouldn't be a bad course change if you had to mix those 2 tribes and those colors, for example, and just go super aggro. It could be a good deck for you. So always remember that stuff when you go through. So overall, yeah, it's a fine card. Maybe it doesn't always make your build. If you're being more methodical, like you're playing dinosaurs or something like that, or trying to go bigger, it's probably not a card you run, but it's good in some builds. Slaughter the Strong. Okay, this one's interesting because it's kind of a board sweep, but not really. And it also allows your opponent sometimes to make decisions, but sometimes not. So it's a weird card. It only costs 3, and that's really what it has going for it. It's not as consistent as other board sweeps that we've seen in previous sets most recently, but here's the thing. You and your opponent get to add up creature's power, and you can keep power up to 4. Everything else has to go. So if your opponent's playing large things, like 5/5, 6/6 dinosaurs, well, they have no choice. Those just have to go. If they have a 4/4, they can keep it, or they can keep like 2/2/2s or a 3/3 and a 1/1, right? Stuff like that. Same thing also applies to you, though. So if you're in the dinosaur deck, you probably don't want to play this, in other words. So if you're in the vampire deck, though, maybe this is not a bad panic button. If you're winning and you don't have to play it, it's a little bit of a bummer when you draw something like this, because you're kind of like, well, I could have drawn another creature and kind of slammed the door on this game, but I drew this instead. But when you're behind, you're going to be like super happy to draw this. So yeah, it just is one of those things. You mitigate the risk, you put it in your deck. Sometimes it backfires, sometimes it'll be great for you. Now, this one, like I said, a little weaker than maybe just a Wrath of God style effect, just generally because your opponent does have some way to manipulate it at times, depending on their board state. But you do too. So it is at least reciprocal, just depending on board states and all. So I don't know. because of that, I would probably play it in a more like smaller aggro vampire build. Definitely skip it if I'm in a larger build like ramp or dinosaurs. And standard, do I get there with this? Maybe. Maybe it's a sideboard card for certain matchups in maybe like a vampire deck or smaller deck. But I don't know, there's so many good board sweeps. Even if I have to pay a little bit more for something that I can trust a little stronger, maybe I just go in that route. I'd like to test it at least. That 3 mana just keeps drawing me back into this card though. Snubhorn Sentry, interesting 1-drop. It mucks up the ground, I'll give it that. 0-3 for 1. If you get the City's Blessing, it becomes a 3-3. But again, don't play this card because you think it's going to be a 3-3 at any time, because by the time it's a 3-3, it might not even matter anymore. The ground will be cluttered up with 5/5s, right? So it's just kind of the nature of things like this. But if you're in the market for something to gum up the ground early, you want a 0-3 because you're trying to ramp into bigger dinosaurs, or maybe you're just trying to play something a little more controlling and methodical, then this is a fine creature for you. It happens to be a dinosaur too. That can matter some of the time. So yeah, it's not for every build, but it is for some. And you know what? If you don't main deck this and you sit down across from an aggro deck that just beats you down in the first game, then definitely bring it in. Don't forget it's there for you. Sphinx's Decree. This is a weird one. First off, for limited, you're not going to be real happy if you open this, right? If this is in your seal pool or it's your pack 1 rare in draft, you're going to be like, ugh. There's not a lot of good use for this in the world of limited. There's actually not a lot of good use for it in the world of standard either, but I'll get to that in a second. So why is this card here? I think it's really more or less that Wizards is making a concerted effort now to sprinkle more universal answers into their sets. You see that definitely with this set. We're going to look at a lot of cards over the course of the week that are really good answers, actually, to certain situations that maybe have happened in the past, could happen in the future. And that is very, very good. Thank you, Wizards, for doing that, because they were not doing that well the last few years, and we saw a lot of problems in the world of Standard because of that. Seems like they're righting the ship now with some of these cards. So even if I don't need this today, I'm glad they're printing it, and I'm glad they're thinking down those lines. And when you start thinking about like older formats, like there's things like Silence that's better than this. You're going to use that before you use this, right? It's just a really awkward card. So yeah, it's strange, and it's probably not very useful. But like I said, I'm glad they're at least thinking about these things. Squire's Devotion. Uh-oh. It's an aura. You all know how I feel about auras. I'm never a big fan of these things. But at least this one gives you a 1/1 white vampire token with lifelink when it enters the battlefield. So even if you get blown out with a 2-for-1, at least you get something out of it. I don't know. Not worth 3 mana, but you get something. You just have to be smart if you're going to play this. Like, you have to wait for the shields to be down. You have to have a creature on the battlefield. Your opponent has to be tapped out. You have to be able to attack in with that creature. You throw it on, you gain a little bit of life, you get the token, and okay, you probably got more than 3 mana's worth out of it if that works out to your advantage with a good creature attached to it. And if they destroy that creature on their next turn, okay, you still got 2-for-1, but at least you got your 3 mana out of this card. But that's not always going to present itself like that. And if you draw this card and you're backed into a corner and you have to use it and you get 2-for-1s, it's not going to be a good day. I'm probably not playing this. I think there's just better stuff. It's not the worst aura I've ever seen. I've seen some bad auras. But this one in particular, like if you had to play it, it's not the end of the world by any means, but I'm going to try to avoid it. Sun Sentinel. We've seen a lot of cards like this in the past. They're just fine and limited. Like 2 drops or 2/2 that has upside to it is good. Like it's a human soldier again, interestingly enough. But yeah, Vigilance 2/2 for 2. Yeah, sign me up. I'm happy to run a few of these, maybe even in my deck. It's a common, so you'll see some of these in a draft. Sun-Crested Pterodon. This one's kind of interesting because it's a 5-drop. It's a 2/5 flyer, though. It's also a dinosaur. Now, if you have another dinosaur that has Vigilance, which is okay, kind of sweet. The big thing is, why do you play this card? First off, it's because A, you want a dinosaur. B, because you really want a flyer. Those are really the 2 main reasons. But you have to mitigate the fact that this thing costs 5, too. And there's going to be other really good 5-drops you might be competing with here. So does this make your cut? Some of the time. I would say maybe 50-60% of the time this would make my cut. Just because it's a fine creature. It's actually pretty good. It's a good blocker, too, in the air. Sometimes you just need that. You might board it in, even if you didn't main deck it against certain matchups. But it's not something that is always going to win out the competition for the 5 spot. Because you don't want to go too heavy in the 5 spot, right? You don't want to clog up your hand early on in the game. So you're going to make some cuts a lot of times once you start talking about 5, 6, 7 drops. So this is one that might not always make that cut. Temple Altasaur. This one's interesting. It's a dinosaur for 5, but it's, when you think dinosaurs for 5, you're probably thinking at least a 5/5 body, right? Maybe something a little more aggressive. This one's more defensive. It's a 3/4. And if a source would deal damage to another dinosaur you control, prevent all but one of that damage. Very interesting. It doesn't turn off Enrage, which is kind of nice, but it also doesn't cover itself. So remember that. Someone can do direct damage to this. Now, with that being said, though, it does have 4 toughness. Not the easiest thing to get rid of in the world, so that's good. Stands up to the 3 damage spells. Stands up even to things like Sweltering Suns, which is kind of cool. So the card is interesting, if nothing else. I would play it. If I'm all in on dinosaurs, hey, why not? It makes combat very difficult for your opponent, so why not go for it? Also, if you happen to play 2 of these, they will cover each other. That's kind of interesting, but F5, I don't know if you want to play 2 of these, quite honestly. It starts to clog up your 5 spot a little more, and you want to make sure you have the more offensive creatures out there if you're playing dinosaurs. If you're not into dinosaurs, obviously, skip this one. This isn't doing anything for you. I don't really see this making it into standard. Dinosaur decks in standard, I mean, we saw the Gruul deck try to make it. It didn't quite get there. I do think all bets are off for this next meta. People are looking at white more, so maybe you will see a Naya deck. Maybe you'll see a Boros deck. I think people are exploring a lot of opportunities. And Rage feels like it's playing a bigger role with this set. Maybe we see that manifest itself in standard. But with all that being said, I think this particular card probably doesn't get there no matter what happens. I will say, though, for Commander, keep an eye on these dinosaurs. Because, again, much like the vampires want to be in the vampire deck, there's a lot of interesting dinosaurs here for your Commander dinosaur decks, too. Trapjaw Tyrant. Okay, well, here's one of those cards you might want to consider. It's a 5/5 for 5. It's a mythic, and that Enrage ability is actually kind of sweet. But I do have to point this out. Top-down design here is amazing, and the art goes along with it pretty well. Basically, I guess the dinosaur just eats the creature's whole, and then when it goes away, the creatures come back. It's kind of awesome. So, really interesting Enrage ability. The only drawback this card really has is the fact that it's a 5/5, so it can be blocked by a 3/3 and a 2/2. It doesn't have any other sort of evasion or anything like that. So if the board state is not conducive to you really just taking over, if you're behind or in a board stall, this might not really do anything. That's kind of awkward. If you're winning, you might win faster. It might be a win more, and you could slam the door on the game. That's not necessarily a bad thing. But if you're in a stalemate, so you're kind of in a board stall, or you're behind, this doesn't necessarily save you either. It might make things a little more difficult for your opponent, but it doesn't necessarily pull you out. Now, playing this with some of those Enrage Enable cards, which you don't see a lot of those in white, we'll be seeing them as we go forward later in the week, but the card becomes a little bit better then. So, yeah, it's definitely playable and limited. Don't get me wrong. I don't want to sound like the card's not good, because it actually is very good. I would probably pick this really high in a draft, if not first pick, maybe second pick for sure, depending on what else is in the pack. And I'd be happy to play it in a dinosaur build, especially with some of those ways to kind of ping my own stuff. But just be aware, it's not going to be the card that saves you and wins you the game. It's not that kind of bomb. It's more of a utility 5-drop. So Talpa Primal Dawn. Wow, these legendary elder dinosaurs are pretty sweet. This feels super pushed. And this one's a rare. It's not even a mythic, by the way. Now, the downside here is the casting cost. 2 white and 6. But you know what? You get a 4/8 flying, double strike, vigilance, trample, indestructible. Yeah, that's super sweet. You just have to get there. You have to get the card out. And there's ways to do that. So let's talk about limited first with this one. How do you get this card out? Well, there's some ramp strategies you could go with. There's even some light reanimation in this set. Granted, it's more in black-green colors, but the light reanimation, maybe you splash this in, and perhaps you're not even thinking about casting it as much as you're thinking about dumping it in your graveyard and reanimating it. That could be an option for you, actually. Or, you know what? You just play with some treasures. 8 mana sounds like a lot, but in a limited game, especially sealed, but even in draft, in this particular set, you have a lot of ways to create the treasure tokens and such that go on. That, 8 mana gets there before you know it. You even have a little bit of light ramp, you have some mana rocks, there's just a lot of ways to get there. And I think most games, you easily get to 8 mana, quite honestly. So if you can dump this thing on the board, your opponent's got to find an answer. And that answer has to come in the form of either an exile spell or force you to sacrifice it or something like that. Not a lot of answers that will work necessarily in the pool of cards. So this thing is a powerhouse when it comes out. There's no doubt about it. So yeah, if I can play this, I'm playing it, right? If I can swing the 2 white, or even in the other example I gave, maybe I don't even swing the 2 white, I just try to reanimate. But however I do this, if I can get this on the battlefield, I'm going for it, right? And, don't be blinded by some of these cards. Just a quick tip. Sometimes you could be either drafting a nice Gruul deck, or maybe you open your sealed pool and all your good cards are in Gruul colors, and then you see this thing. You really want to play it, but sometimes you have to kind of stop and check yourself. There are times you might be able to splash, but this is a double white, so don't overextend yourself. Your deck might be better without it sometimes, so do remember that. But your deck is going to be great if you can swing this. But make sure you can swing it, in other words. Let's talk about other things besides limited with this one. Well, Commander, yeah, all these Elder Dinosaurs seem really fun in Commander. Whether they're going to be your Commander or just another support card or maybe just in a Dinosaur Commander deck, whatever you're doing with it, they're a lot of fun. They can do a lot of stuff. Great utility. Now, what about Standard? Can it get there? I actually think it's possible. So where do you see this thing being played? Well, again, 8 mana is a lot. 8 mana is probably too much for the most part. But what about Godpharaoh's Gift? I think Godpharaoh's Gift might be a good place for this. And maybe it works in conjunction with the Angels, or maybe, I don't know, maybe it replaces the Angels. But I'd like to test it out there. I feel like this could be actually really sweet in a Godpharaoh's Gift build. And that's a good deck to begin with, so maybe this is just a card that pushes it even farther. Who knows? Also, I mean, maybe a little more of a long shot, but could you play one of these in an approach deck as a secondary win condition or something like that? Maybe, because you're kind of drawing out the game a little more, you're being a little more methodical, controlling. You might have more time to get to something like this. Once you do, if you can't get your approach to work, then you have another way to win. I don't know. Just, again, something I'd want to test. Don't know if it would get there, but just a few interesting ideas. But there's probably other things you can think of as well, of course, with this card. All right, with that being said, those are all the white cards. So it's kind of a quick look at everything. We're going to be back tomorrow with the blue. We'll work our way through the color pie as the week goes on. But until next time, thanks for watching. Please remember to like, subscribe. Have a great day. Hey, thanks for watching. This video is made possible by the generous support of viewers like you on Patreon. Check out the description below for links to our Patreon page as well as our Amazon affiliate store, where a small percentage of all sales will also help support the channel. Finally, if you haven't had a chance yet to subscribe, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss any new videos on Heroes and Legends. Talk to you again soon, and have a great day.